I have to ask forgiveness of all of my parishioners. It's rare that I get to speak with my family at Mass, and so it's going to get a little detailed here on the Matz family, and I'm sorry. The rest of you, well, I'm family. You have to deal with it. I'm so glad that the Crosby family decided to do the funeral here at St. Joseph's. They could have done it at Assumption, the largest church in the county. They could have done it at Sacred Heart, where Pat would have been going to Mass while she was still able to get to Mass. But they chose here because this is the family church. This is where everybody grew up. And even though it wasn't in this building, where everybody was baptized. And I have a couple historical notes that I want to read first to really situate us in who these people were. And we're going to start with the Matzes, Joseph and Tekla. These are Pat's grandparents. This is a very brief segment from the Catholic Northwest Progress in 1905, March 1905. This is right after Father Boulay left Bellingham to be full-time in Ferndale, to minister to Ferndale and its missions and the Lummi people. It says, Father Boulay, pastor of St. Joseph's, Ferndale, is making extensive improvements, having built and finished a new parish house, and is also beautifying the grounds. One of the oldest settlers at Ferndale is Jacob Matz, who donated the ground St. Joseph's stands on. Mr. Matz takes great pleasure in assisting the pastor and making it pleasant for him. 1905, that would be my great-great-great-great-grandfather, I think, helping the pastor, making sure that everything was good for him. Now, I want to situate that a little bit better, though, because we have this history of the parish that was written by a Nancy Riley, and she has a couple notes that make the family look a little less pious, shall we say. In 1900, the church was moved across the railroad tracks to a site on 3rd Street, which was bought and donated by Jacob Matz. Morris Riley recounts that his father, T.P. Riley, moved the church. Loretta Riley Hunter remembers that the rollers they used to move the building were present on their family farm when she was a child. According to excerpts from the notes of Father William O'Brien in 1942, he states, the church was moved away from the river to its present location on 3rd Street. Mr. J. Matz had bought the property for $450, part of which he gave for the church purposes, $350 by $165, taking the old property in exchange, which soon after he sold at $400. The rest of the property, bought at $450, sold for $1,600. So according to Mr. Matz's statement, he did not lose any money through the deal. Our family donated the original land for St. Joseph, but we made a pretty penny on it, and so there we go. But regardless of what we say about Joseph, Tekla, his wife, again, Pat's grandmother, very devout by all accounts. This is an obituary for Tekla published in January 1928. Now, she was buried at St. Joseph's Church January 7th, 1928. So almost 98 years ago to the day in this city, Pat's grandmother was buried in the same way with the same Mass. And it says this. This is a little long, but please indulge me. January 4th, Ferndale. Mrs. Tekla Matz, beloved wife of Jacob Matz, passed away yesterday at the family home here after a brief illness of 3 months. She was 77 years old on the day of her death and had been a resident of Ferndale for 51 years. Mrs. Matz, who was a native of Germany, came to Ferndale over half a century ago, and here at the little chapel on the Lummi Indian Reservation, her marriage to Jacob Matz took place. Bishop Louis Lutens of Idaho, who was passing through the reservation, officiated. Mrs. Matz always took a great interest in the Ferndale parish and was a most exemplary Catholic woman, as well as a devoted wife and a loving mother. She was widely known, and her death is mourned by a large number of friends. To St. Joseph's Parish, her passing is a real loss, and her place will not soon be filled. The funeral will take place at 10 a.m. Saturday from St. Joseph's Church with Requiem Mass. Reverend Robert Dillon, who attended her during her illness and who gave her the last sacraments of the Church, will officiate, and interment will be in the Catholic cemetery. Besides her husband, Jacob Matz, she She leaves to mourn her loss 3 children, 17 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. The children are Joseph Matz of Bellingham, Mrs. T.P. Riley, and Albert Matz of Ferndale. A granddaughter is Sister M. Dolorosa, OSD, of Ellensburg. Again, a very devout woman, core to this parish. That's where Pat came from. Pat would have been 6 years old when Tekla died. Pat may very well have had short memories of her grandmother. And then TP seems to have done very well for himself in Ferndale. His wife, Josephine, these are Pat's parents. The only mention I could really find of them is here, also in the St. Joseph's history. Jacob Matz donated the church's first organ, after which his daughter, Josephine Matz, soon to be Riley, became the church's first organist. Deeply rooted. Pat was deeply rooted in Ferndale and in this church in Ferndale. She moved to Anacortes, had a life and a career, and moved back. But where we come from matters. What we receive matters. To tie that in with the faith, I can't imagine what it would have been like to be in Ferndale in the mid-1870s. There was no church except the Indian church. That's why Jacob and Tekla were married there, because that was it. It was the ministry to the natives, and then the priest would every now and again take care of the settlers, but that's it. They had to fell their own trees. They had to build and plow their own farms, still there up on Matt's Road off of Enterprise. That was a lot of hard work. And I don't know how they could have gotten through any of that without their faith. The hardest times in my life, I have to go back to faith. It's always that there is a hope. And I don't know what these settlers went through, what these pioneers went through. But I have to imagine they were very, very hard days. Tekla left Germany, it seems, at about the age of 26. She had family and friends. She had already established a life there, not yet married. Came out to the ends of the earth from their estimation. Not just to America, but to the furthest ends of America. And immediately, she went to faith. She was one of 7 families that petitioned for them to build a church here in Ferndale, that asked the bishop to approve a new church after the Lummi one and the Bellingham one. This one's number 3 in the county. She relied on it, and her husband spent years and years investing in it because faith mattered. Why? Why did faith matter? Well, the stories I'm telling you about family are very much the way in which Christianity has passed down. We tell the stories that matter to us. We talk about the people that matter to us. And nobody in this world matters more than Jesus Christ. There is a man who died on a cross, and then he walked out of his tomb. And everybody who knew him and everybody who saw him knew that this was the most important thing that ever did happen and ever will happen on this earth, in this world, in this universe. God became man. He died for our sins, and he rose from the dead. The fact that somebody walked out of their tomb means that there is hope for humanity. In the darkest times, in every era and every culture, in every city, state, and nation, we can say, no matter what happens, God has conquered death. And if God has conquered death, he has conquered everything else beside. There is nothing more important than the resurrection. And so St. Paul writes a bunch of letters to a bunch of people. And the gospel writers make sure that within the lifetime of the apostles, it is recorded what Jesus said and did and taught, and that he died and he rose from the dead. And then every Christian since then has handed those stories on, because this is the most important story in the history of humanity, and it is never to be lost. We must talk about the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. We must talk about the fact that he saved us from our sins. And we have to give that to our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids and our great-grandkids. Tekla Matz probably did the flowers, and Josephine Matz played the organ, and eventually their great-great-grandson became a Catholic priest. Every single one of us who passes on the story of Jesus gives that hope to the next generation. Pat is a generational figure, the last of a very specific generation of this family and this parish. She handed on to us deeply important things. She handed on to us, honestly, humor. She was hilarious. I think about one time I was with Les and Pat in the hospital, and the doctor was basically saying that she was dehydrated, and she asked what she could do about it. And he was like, well, you could stop drinking coffee. But he's like, but you've made it to 100. Like, you can drink whatever you want. And she's like, no, I will stop drinking coffee. Okay, Pat, like, you're 100. It's fine. She had a humor. She handed on to us humor. She handed on to us virtue and dedication and discipline. She handed on to us faith, as that entire generation handed on to us faith. We should not lose or forget the stories of our family and of what they did. I would not be in the United States if these German and Irish immigrants hadn't made the sacrifices that they did to come to the United States. I would not be a Catholic if these Catholics had not done what they did to support their parish and to hand on the faith. Those are two deeply important things, our nationality and our salvation. Let's not forget what they've given us. Let's honor Pat. Let's bring what she gave us into the next generations. And let's thank God for everything that she gave us and everything that he has given us.